Hey there, this is Tony, and welcome back to BorderlineHR. Today's topic is boundaries, what they are, and how to set healthy ones, which is especially important and hard for us people suffering from borderline personality disorder, as our self-image tends to be more unstable and more easily distorted. Healthy boundaries are not only beneficial for oneself, but also for others, as they give reliable safety to all involved. A boundary is a limit of space between you and the other person, a clear point where you end and the other one begins. The purpose of setting a healthy boundary is of course to protect you and take good care of you. Boundaries are built out of a mix of conclusions, beliefs, opinions, attitudes, past experiences, and social learning. Setting boundaries is an important part of establishing one's identity and is a crucial aspect of mental health and well-being. Boundaries can be physical or emotional and can range from loose to rigid, with healthy boundaries often falling somewhere in between. Learning to show compassion and kindness to oneself is crucial in establishing healthy boundaries. Generally speaking, there are a few broad categories that categorize boundary violations: verbal, psychological, emotional, and physical. Ethical, spiritual, or moral boundaries exist as well. Verbal violations include not allowing you to speak or be heard, raising their voice and or screaming at you, saying things that are derogatory or inflammatory against your character or about your integrity, or gossiping about you. Psychological and emotional boundary violations include preying upon your sense of self and self-esteem, using what you've told them in confidence against you, lying to you, criticizing, demeaning, judging you, manipulating you, making fun of you, or your thoughts, feelings, or beliefs, shaming or embarrassing you, bullying you, or assuring you that their thoughts and feelings are superior to yours and more important than yours. Physical violations include moving into your personal space, touching you without permission, being inappropriate or too familiar, especially sexually, touching or handling things that belong to you, violating your privacy, damaging or destroying your personal property, or threatening you with physical harm. When you don't set boundaries on what you will say yes and no to, you can easily take on more responsibilities than what you're comfortable with just to please others. This is called rejection sensitivity and can add stress as you try to navigate a lifestyle that is too busy for your comfort level. If you don't respect your own limits, others may not respect them either. Not setting boundaries or limitations on your own time can also make it harder for others to realize if they've asked too much of you. Feelings of resentment. When you continue to say yes to things that you would rather have said no to, you might start to feel angry or resentful. It may seem as if others are taking advantage of you, or that you are being expected to give too much. This resentment can also damage relationships you're trying to strengthen by saying yes. Increased conflict. When you feel like the give and take in a relationship is out of balance, this can create conflict. Conflict often leads to stress, which can not only harm the relationship further, but also harm your physical health. Every relationship experiences a level of conflict or disagreement. When this conflict is related to not setting boundaries or to not enforcing them, you may find that it lingers. It's never fully resolved because it keeps happening again and again and again and again. Maintaining healthy boundaries lets others know where they stand with you, and this can prevent additional conflict in your relationships. It can also decrease the amount of imbalance and resentment you may feel, reducing your stress even further. Healthy boundaries are a crucial component of self-care. That's because in work or in our professional relationships, poor boundaries lead to resentment, anger, and burnout. Generally, the consequences often include stress, financial burdens, wasted time, and of course relationship issues, which cause immense stress. In other words, a lack of healthy boundaries can negatively impact all aspects of a person's life. The first step in setting healthy boundaries is to realize where your own personal boundaries lie. How comfortable are you with people getting close to you or taking certain liberties with you? Often, your first clue is the feeling you get when a boundary is violated. Because different people have different boundaries, something that bothers others may not bother you or vice versa. Therefore, it's important to communicate to others where your comfort or discomfort levels lie, so that people with different boundaries may be able to keep from violating yours. Setting boundaries isn't always easy. The process itself, letting people know where your needs and limits are, can often be stressful, especially for those that aren't used to it. When people are used to relationship boundaries that are at a certain point, they can put up a fight if you try to change boundaries with them, and people often try to test boundaries among another. This can all be very stressful, especially when you take into account the toll of conflict on stress levels. However, the end result may be still worth it. Relationships that involve greater levels of mutual respect, that meet the needs of all parties involved, and that create much less stress for everyone. You feel resentful of people asking too much of you, and it seems to happen very often. You find yourself saying yes to things you'd rather not do just to avoid upsetting or disappointing others. You find yourself resentful because you are doing more for them than they are doing for you. You tend to keep most people at an arm's length because you're afraid of letting people get too close and overwhelming you. You find yourself feeling that the most you do for other people, and they may not even appreciate it that much. The stress that you feel from disappointing others is greater than the stress of doing things that inconvenience you or drain you in an effort to please them. There are questions you can ask yourself when you're looking at specific choices you can make, rather than your feelings in general, that can help you decide whether or not a boundary needs to be set. The following questions can help you clarify your boundaries in specific situations and navigate through future ones. If nobody would be disappointed, would you prefer to say yes or no? Looking at all the benefits and costs of the situation, both tangible and intangible, is it worth the effort to say yes? Would you feel comfortable posing the same request to someone else? If people would be upset with you if you say no, do you feel that they come from a respectful, reasonable place? If not, it might be time to set some limits. Is this a precedent you want to set? And if not, where would a reasonable place be to draw the line? Think of someone you feel has very healthy boundaries, the kind you would like to emulate. How do you think they would respond in this situation? Once you've determined how you're feeling, you can decide if you indeed wish to set a boundary. In a perfect world, once we're aware where our personal comfort zones lie, we need simply to communicate, and a relationship boundary is set. However, quite often in the real world, boundary setting involves some negotiation, and it doesn't always go that smoothly. Believe you me, I tell you. People have boundaries of their own they may not match, and they may push for greater distance or closeness for their own reasons. Changing boundaries from the status quo can also cause people to react by trying to reinforce an existing or previous boundary, sometimes in ways that make us uncomfortable. In this way, setting boundaries can be a struggle. Because we need to think of our own needs as well as the needs and reactions of others, it's important to be circumspect in setting boundaries. The questions you ask yourself when discovering where your own boundaries lie are different from the set of questions you ask yourself when deciding where to actually set your boundaries. When you set boundaries in specific situations, you need to take into account practical factors like the cost of setting the boundary. They also allow you to be clear on issues of guilt, should or should you not feel guilty, and motivation. Is it worth it? So you can move forward with the least amount of stress. Here's another set of questions you can ask yourself. What is fair here? If you were in the position of the other person, would your solution still feel fair? Have you committed to this? Is there another solution to this that may be a win-win? Does the act of setting this boundary or making a change create more stress than it might alleviate in the long run? When you imagine the results in a year from now, do you get a sense that this would be a better solution than what you have now? If you're setting a boundary and you feel the other person is unreasonable in fighting that boundary, are you maybe willing to let the relationship go rather than feel hurt by the boundary mismatch? It's important to note that you will likely be weighing your own feelings more heavily than those of others because you must live with the consequences of your decisions. You're also the one who will have to live with the consequences of their choices. Ultimately, we all have our own comfort levels for boundaries, but these questions provide food for thought. Although this may be stressful in the moment, once you decide to set boundaries, it minimizes some of your stress. Working on boundary setting strategies and NVC can bring some positive results in your life. An important part of setting boundaries is examining the boundaries that already exist, or the ones that are lacking in one's life. For example, someone might decide that they have healthy boundaries with their partner but not with their coworkers. From there, they decide which boundaries they want to set with their coworkers. As for how to exactly set those boundaries, say no, simply but firmly, to something you don't want to do. If another person asks you and you want to explain it, do so, but don't over-explain yourself. It is your right to say no at any time. You can also keep the focus on yourself by saying something like, I need some time for myself when I get home from work, instead of telling someone, you have to stop bothering me when I come home from work. Another important thing to remember is that it is impossible to set boundaries without consequences. This means that when setting boundaries, it is important to explicitly state why they are important. It is also crucial to only declare consequences which you are willing to follow through on, or else the boundaries will not be effective. In general, the key to setting boundaries is figuring out what you want from your various relationships, setting boundaries based on those desires and needs, and then being clear with yourself and others about your boundaries. Boundaries in relationships can be especially important. Healthy boundaries can be the difference between a happy, healthy relationship and a toxic, dysfunctional one. A lack of boundaries can lead to an unhealthy relationship because one partner may feel that they have no privacy anymore. However, too many boundaries can also be an issue. The fact that boundaries are important in relationship underscores the importance of setting and respecting boundaries. It's important to understand and respect each other's boundaries in a long-term partnership, just as it is important to respect the boundaries of people you do not know that well. One good way to avoid crossing someone's boundaries and to have your own boundaries uncrossed is to have an honest conversation about your boundaries with the other person. A common misperception about boundaries is that keeping everyone in your life at arm's length is the same thing as having strong, healthy boundaries, that you can't let others in if you want to be happy. This isn't exactly true. In fact, allowing others to get close to you in a healthy way is the true goal of boundary setting. Proper boundaries allow you to have close relationships that respect the needs of all involved. They enable you to be independent and interdependent at the same time. Most of us have some people in our lives that require a different response, and indeed may need to be kept at arm's length, because they do not respect the boundaries we've set. But the majority of people can be allowed to get close to us without stepping on our toes, as long as we let them know where we stand. The bottom line is that setting healthy boundaries in relationships is a key skill for relationship stress management. It's a kindness we can do for ourselves as well as for the ones we are close to. Oof, this is another really hard topic for me, as not only my unstable sense of self plays into this, but also the ever-looming fear of abandonment. Ugh, makes me shiver, I tell you. Most of my non-physical boundaries have always felt rather fluid to me, while my physical boundaries are heavily defended as a reaction to my history with being abused. Feeling like you're undeserving of or not good enough for another person can cause us to do things for them we didn't even want to do in the first place and wouldn't do otherwise. This can be positive or negative, but since we're talking about boundaries, I will be focusing on the negative here, which is a particularly set of skills I am really good at. I have said and done things for people that left me feeling ashamed. And my fellow BPD sufferers, I fear that most of you can relate. To prevent things like this from happening again, the acceptance and reinforcement of our boundaries is indispensable. I say acceptance here because me myself, as well as many people with BPD that I'm friends with, sometimes even want to do those things, even though we know that we'll be crossing our own boundaries there. Healthy coping mechanisms. Don't try and normalize things that you are not comfortable with, and trust your intuition on this. I know that it is even harder for us BPD sufferers, who've been repeatedly invalidated on our feelings and being told we're overreacting, to still place trust in our own feelings. But please do. If another person continues to disrespect our boundaries and or trigger us, intentionally or unintentionally, we will have to distance ourselves or break off the relationship. When you're not sure if your boundaries seem to be realistic, or you feel the need for them to be different, talk about them with the person you trust and whose opinion is trusted by you. Preferably your therapist or someone with BPD who is in therapy, and then reflect on your views of your boundaries. But I can tell you out of experience, most of your boundaries will be completely reasonable. The stronger your sense of self, the better you will become at setting and reinforcing your boundaries. Do not confuse this with being ignorant of the responsibilities you do carry in your relationships. So my suggestions for you would be: try and learn NVC as it minimalizes the conflict potential in setting boundaries. Build your sense of self. Heed the aforementioned points about setting healthy boundaries. And fourth, as always, DBT therapy. And now, let's talk about respecting boundaries. After telling you that physical boundaries always need to be respected, the first thing coming to my mind is oversharing. It can honestly be hard for us not to do that, with all the suffering we feel, especially in our worst moments. I understand that this comes from a part of myself that desperately wants to be accepted, understood, and seen in full, not only the parts I push forward to protect the other ones. I would never tell you that sharing is bad, but it's important for us to be able to recognize the signs of oversharing and to check in with the person listening to us if they're still comfortable with what we're telling them about. Be wary, as this might trigger a fear of abandonment, and if that happens, take a time out from the situation and use your skills to manage the waves of emotion. Share honestly what's going on inside yourself, but don't forget that there's a difference between healthy, honest sharing and oversharing, and the difference is the boundary set by your listener, so be mindful of it. Also refrain from testing other people. While it may seem logical to us to do this, to know if someone's reliable in emergency situations, or is one of our attempts to avoid abandonment, it is nothing but counterproductive. Generally, talk to people about what they're comfortable with and what not, preferably before exposing them to it. Our need for contact, reassurance, and to be seen can lead us to disrespect boundaries, often unintentional. If you discover your boundary being disrespected or passed over by your favorite borderliner, talk to them about boundaries in a moment where you're both calm, not in the heat of an argument, because they may feel this is a form of rejection. Decide what behavior you will and what behavior you will not tolerate from the person, and make those expectations clear. For example, you may tell your loved one, "If you can't talk to me without screaming at me, I will walk out." Here are a few do's and don'ts for these types of situations. Do: calmly reassure the person with BPD when setting limits. Say something like, "I love you and I want our relationship to work, but I can handle the stress caused by this behavior. I need you to make this change for me." Make sure everyone involved agrees on boundaries and how they're going to be enforced. Think of setting boundaries as a process rather than a single event. Instead of hitting your loved one with a long list of boundaries all at once, introduce them gradually, one or two at a time. Please do not make threats or ultimatums you can carry out. Be consistent. Also, ultimatums are the last resort, and again, you must be prepared to follow through with them. Tolerate abusive behavior. No one should have to put up with verbal abuse or physical violence. 3. Enable the person with BPD by protecting them from the consequences of their actions. If your loved one won't respect your boundaries or makes you feel unsafe, then you may need to leave. It doesn't mean that you don't love them. Your self-care should take priority here. Thank you for watching. Do you have any questions you'd like me to answer, or borderline-related topics you'd want me to cover, or experiences you'd like to share? The comment section is yours. Please also don't forget to save the like and subscribe button from their respective feelings of abandonment, and see you next time. Be kind to one another.